Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is May the 8th, 2026. We're still in Mental Health Awareness Month. Today, I want to discuss the LSD killing of Frank Olson. On November 28th, 1953, around 2 a.m., Frank Olson, who was a bacteriologist, biological warfare scientist and expert working for the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Program and also a CIA. He worked a CIA employee. Uh, Apparently, jumped from the 10th floor of his hotel room in the Statler Hilton Hotel in Manhattan, New York. He died shortly after on the pavement. Um, the official explanation was he had committed suicide. That he while in his underwear, he just ran through his room and plunged to his death. That was the initial official explanation. However, later on, it was ruled a death. It was ruled death by misadventure after the CIA admitted, U.S. government admitted in the 70s, following the Rockefeller Commission into the illegal activities of the CIA and other intelligence agencies on Americans. So in the report, the government admitted that um, Frank Olson's boss, Sidney Gottlieb, had surreptitiously drugged him with LSD in some kind of um, study, an LSD study of CIA agents while they were at a resort in Maryland, and they were unknown to the CIA agents. Frank Olson was said to react, uh, adversely. Adversely, he didn't react well to the LSD drugging, and they said his case was exacerbated due to an apparent underlying mental health problem. That was the official explanation. The government eventually settled with the family in 1975, in the 70s anyway, paying them $750,000 for a wrongful death. Of course, the government will not typically admit to wrongdoing, but they settled with the family, paid them $750,000. This was 20 years after the incident. And of course, President Gerald Ford apologized, and the CIA director at the time, I think, was Richard Helms, or no, William Colby, I think, apologized to the family. However, that was the official explanation, that it was death by misadventure, that he had reacted, he hadn't reacted well to the covert LSD drugging, which he had never given consent to, which he was unaware of. He wasn't the only person that was drugged at this resort in Maryland. There were others, agents who were drugged. That's the official explanation. And they say at the time, um, Frank Olson was also struggling with mental health issues because he had agreed to actually see a psychiatrist whom he'd worked with, Dr. Abramson, in New York. Dr. Abramson was an expert who experimented with LSD, right? He'd been experimenting with LSD to uncover the basis of mental illness. In fact, Dr. Abramson himself had been accidentally dosed with LSD in his experiments, and he got high. So LSD is a very dangerous drug. Let me just clarify that first of all. It's a very dangerous drug. It's banned. It's illegal in all 50 U.S. states, and you know, amongst the side effects of using LSD, which normally last about 12 hours, it takes effect from 30 minutes from exposure to 12 hours. Basically, the symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, extreme paranoia. It could be severe anxiety, um, severe outbreak of sweat. So you know the basically the trip, sometimes it can result in suicidal ideations, and that was supposed to have been what happened in the case of um, Frank Olson, right? However, much later on, his son, one of his family, continued to investigate, and they became concerned, especially with the 70s investigations of the of Congress's investigations of the CIA and other intelligence agencies' abuses, illegal acts, activities against Americans that violated the constitutional rights of Americans. And in the Rockefeller Commission report, of course, when it was disclosed that he actually hadn't committed, that he might not have committed suicide. I mean, it was ruled death by misadventure. There was the admission that he had been drugged by his boss with LSD, without his knowledge. And that triggered, those extreme agitations. He had been drugged around November 19, right, 1953 in Maryland. And he plunged to his death in on November 28th, right, about 9 days after that. But many other things came, were discovered after there was the family requested a new autopsy, and they saw inconsistencies. Uh, he found that he had cuts, abrasions, and he had blunt force trauma on his body, which was inconsistent with a fall, right, a fall from a from the 10th floor, right, of a building. So there are indications that he he the indication suggested that he had been uh, it was death by homicide. It wasn't death by misadventure. It appeared that he'd been beaten up, he'd been tortured or something, because there were cuts, there were abrasions, it was blunt force trauma. And so the family and different historians, people who've done research on this later on, somebody wrote a book called A Terrible Mistake and gave explanations why the CIA may have actually committed an assassination, that there was a homicide um, of Frank Olson, and that his killing was actually ordered by the highest levels of the CIA, from no less than Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, was director of the CIA. Um, why would the government want Frank Olson uh, dead? So I'm going to try and discuss some of this. Again, all of this that I'm discussing is unclassified, right? This is not classified material. It's all out there because the family, and there was a report much later on in the 70s by, there was a church committee, and then there was the Rockefeller Commission, which had a report and exposed the program MKUltra, and he was actually involved in the program MKUltra, and it was said that he got conflicted, had a guilty conscience, and he was disaffected with the program, and he suspected that the U.S. had used biological weapons warfare in the Korean War between 1951 and was it 1953, and between 1950 and 53 anyway. That and There were other things he knew, that he'd witnessed tortures in black sites in Europe, in Germany, in which Soviet agents and ex-Nazi expendables were tortured to death, and all of this, made him feel made him feel guilt ridden, and he was disaffected, and so he was viewed as unreliable, and that the purpose of actually drugging was not really an experiment, right? The because the CIA was testing, was using LSD for mind control. They had a mind control project. That's the MKUltra, and that it was trying to. The claims were that it was trying to use LSD, look for some kind of way to be able to brainwash people, right? In order to match what the Soviets and Chinese were supposedly doing, as we see in the movie The Manchurian Candidate, right? Uh, so it was believed that during the Korean War that American prisoners of war, right, were brainwashed, that were tortured with chemical agents, right, and they exposed. Some of them had actually exposed some of the U.S. Tactics and claimed that the U.S. was using biological warfare and had dropped anthrax, aerosolized anthrax, plague, cholera uh, through an aircraft over Korea, over North Korea, and so that they had exposed U.S. secrets. Many of these prisoners of war defected to North Korea, defected to the Soviets, and refused to return to the United States. And of course, this is the motivation, the inspiration for the movie The Manchurian Candidate. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it. I did a video explaining the Manchurian Candidate. So, and there was also something else, in the summer of 1951. Um, Frank Olson had been traveling in the UK, France, Germany, and it was around that time that there was this mass poisoning in a French village of Pont Saint-Esprit. Uh, Pont Saint-Esprit, Pont Saint-Esprit. That's a French village in which it is said there was mass poisoning um, of through naturally occurring ergot. Right, ergot is the it's is the um, chemical, is the agent through which LSD is derived. Right, and so there was a reaction, right? About 250 people, villages in Pont Saint Esprit were affected, and in fact, about 50 people were institutionalized in insane asylums as a result of this mass poisoning, and that at least 7 people died. There was someone who was hallucinating and became delusional and jumped to his death because he thought he was an airplane, right? He thought it was an airplane, someone from this village. And a son, tried to kill his mother. That people basically went crazy. In fact, it was called the apocalyptic night. People just went crazy. And what's interesting about the village Pont Saint Esprit, it wasn't far from the Swiss, uh, the Swiss um, uh, area, right? The Swiss locale where LSD was actually invented, right? And the company that invented LSD is now part of Novartis, right? Um, so it's sort of a coincidence that Frank Olson was in Europe at this time. So this book called A Terrible Mistake claims that this is part of what conflicted Frank Olson, that he knew what they had, that the CIA was involved um, in the mass poisoning in this French village. Uh, uh, that's Pont Saint Esprit, where naturally occurring ergot had caused some kind of mass delusion. The effects of LSD, and people, became insane, and that it was a result of human uh, human subject research, experimenting, which was illegal. It was a result of illegal research, and that he became convinced that the U.S. had used warfare, biological weapons in the Korean War, and that he'd actually witnessed the torture and killing due to the illegal tactics that caused extreme trauma for U.S. For Soviet agents and suspected spies in Germany in some of these black sites and safe houses. A black site or safe house is a place where intelligence agencies uh, uh, take people, suspected spies or people they want to torture or to get information so that they can be out of reach of jurisdiction and out of public scrutiny, and they can operate under the policy of uh, plausible denial, right? So that's what a black sites and a safe house is. So they said that's Frank Olson had been exposed to these safe houses, what was going on in the safe houses. He'd witnessed the torture and he was disturbed by it and he wanted to quit. They said on November 24, 1953, he wanted to resign, right? He actually offered to resign, but somehow he was persuaded to go and see a psychiatrist instead, to go and receive psychiatric treatment, and that was the reason why he'd gone to New York, and he'd met with Dr. Abramson. Um, However, from the research of his son later on, his son says that, well, the purpose of him being drugged, right? The purpose of, and other writers, right? They allege that the reason why Frank Olson was drugged at the retreat was not for some kind of experiment. It was not some kind of covert experiment. It was a covert drugging. He was unaware of this and he reacted to it. He became agitated. He became paranoid. He became they said he felt he was incompetent, and that's why he said he wanted to quit. He became severely depressed. They said, so his son concluded that the reason for the LSD drugging was to use LSD actually as a truth serum. So LSD is said to be used as some kind of truth serum, right? That when when they use LSD, people just feel conflicted and they start talking, they start telling the truth. So that was a reason that they were also using it for um, interrogation and torture uh, techniques in the mind control program to be able to get um, information out of suspected spies or suspected foreign agents. So the Eric Olson concluded that the reason for the LSD drugging was to use LSD as a truth serum to find out how much Frank Olson knew and to see if he was reliable. And they concluded that he was unreliable. He knew too much, and that the reason of sending him to New York was to dispose of him, but to mask it, right? To use a false flag, to cover it up, to stage it, and make it appear that he was just stressed out, and the covert drugging of the LSD, which was supposed to have been for an experiment, that he reacted adversely to it. And initially, the drugging wasn't supposed to be exposed. It wasn't supposed to be disclosed, but the idea was to stage his death and make it seem that like he was exhausted and he had underlying mental health problems, and that was the reason why they asked him to go and see a psychiatrist, that's Dr. Abramson, and to treat him for mental illness. They said he had agreed. He was supposed to be checked into a sanatorium in Rockville, Maryland, before his death, right? So, um, another reason that reinforces, that his son Eric Olson reinforced his theory by by pointing out that the CIA's first assassination manual um, states that um, the most efficient accidental accidental death, right, is falling from a building at least 75 feet, right? And 75 feet, that's the equivalent of, say, 7.5 floors, right? About 7.5 floors. Uh, Frank Olson's hotel room was on the 10th floor of the Statler Hilton Hotel, and of course he plunged from there. And again, the inconsistencies of the statements of the people that were with him. Now, uh, without a doubt, it's been ruled that Frank Olson did not commit suicide. That's why the government settled with the family. Um, After the whole MKUltra program was discovered, the CIA director at the time, I think Richard Helms, he ordered the destruction of documents. Lots of documents were destroyed and things were covered up. And so it is very unclear. Again, the purpose of MK Ultra was to try and uh, accomplish some kind of mind control um, over um, over adversaries, right? Because the CIA, the U.S. government, believed that the Chinese and the USSR were actually using, they had mind control chemicals. And of course, historians have counted that all the claims of the US using biological weapons in North Korea in the Korean War was fabricated propaganda by the Chinese and the USSR. So none of this has been proven. Um, but in any event, it's interesting how the effects of LSD and how easily LSD can be ingested. It can be aerosolized. It can be aerosolized, right? It can be used as a uh, it can be inhaled, right? And it can also, one can get infected by touching, right? Like Dr. Abramson indicated, that's a psychiatrist whom Frank Olson went to see. He indicated that he himself uh, he'd been intoxicated by experimenting inadvertently, accidentally, while he was experimenting with LSD because it went through his skin. It touched his skin, and he became high and all that stuff. He became depressed, manifesting all the symptoms. And LSD, it's unfortunate that as dangerous as it is estimated, the U.S. NIH and FBI indicate that over 20 million Americans have used LSD, right? Over 20 million Americans have used LSD. 9.7% to 10% of American adults over the age of 12 have used LSD. Um, 8% of all US high schoolers have used LSD, and over 200,000 Americans experiment with LSD for the first time every year. Over 200,000. It's a very dangerous drug. People who go to raves, right? Raves and uh, they call it acid. I think the other name for LSD is acid. So with regard to the effects, the symptoms, they call it an acid trip. And LSD can, people might react to it differently, but definitely it induces psychosis, extreme paranoia, delusions, hallucinations. Right? It's a strong hallucinogenic, right? Psychedelic drug, as they call it. So, the Americans, the increase in the use of LSD, they said since between 2015 and 2018, it increased in America by 56%. Again, it's a dangerous drug. It's banned in all 50 states in the US. And they say it's not physically addictive. It's not as addictive, but its reaction is very dangerous, right? It could cause suicidal ideations, like in the case of the French village Pont-Saint-Esprit, where the uh, poisoning, it's alleged that it was an experimental uh, poisoning that happened, right? Where 50 people reacted adversely, 50 people ended up in an insane asylum. People were delusional. One person, uh, you know, you know, I, you know, I don't know if one calls it a suicide or death by misadventure, plunged to his death because he thought it was a plane. He was delusional and thought it was a plane. One person was violent. A child was violent, and attempted to kill his mother. So it's a very dangerous drug. And what is funny is it's available to law enforcement, right? And it's available in America, and it looks like it's a drug of choice for law enforcement or the clandestine services, right, to drug someone and stage a death, right? I've talked about the time Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, who were called the plumbers in the Watergate scandal, where they tried to stage an assassination of the reporter, the journalist Jack Anderson, who went against President Nixon and was one of the enemies on President Nixon's list. One of the ways they say it was their boss Chuck Colson who ordered it, uh, apparently ordered the assassination of Jack Anderson, and that one of the methods that the CIA agent and the CIA ex-CIA operative and FBI agent what that they were going to use was they were going to use LSD, lace the steering of the journalist with LSD, and so he would get high from touching it, and he would become delusional, and he would crash his car and die, right? So LSD, this was something that I found out. I've talked about how I was wrongfully detained, and during my wrongful detention, I met with people who use drugs, right? And I asked them about drugs. I've never experimented with drugs. I don't use drugs, but I started asking them about drugs, and they told me about things like LSD, the effects of LSD, what LSD can cause, um, and how it can actually be used. It could be ingested, right? It can be uh, wrongly administered to someone without their knowledge through, placing it on objects that they touch, right? Just as the psychiatrist, Dr. Abramson, said, well, that he touched it and he became intoxicated with it. And the plan of E. Howard Hunt and uh, Libby was to lace the spike the steering wheel of the journalist so he would get high and he would crash his car. So it's kind of funny that we have to be very careful. We have to be cautious that law enforcement and rogue agents uh, apparently acting on behalf of the government might do things, might even other Americans, criminal elements within our society can get hold of a very dangerous drug like LSD and eliminate you know their their foes and stage it to seem like they went berserk or they committed suicide. So in any event, that's it. I just wanted to talk about the story of Frank Olson and how that went down through an unfortunate covert drugging by LSD. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I will keep you posted. Thank you.